Welcome to In Focus. I am your host, Hayden Greene, and we have another amazing photographer as one of our guests today. I want you to put your hands together wherever you are. Go ahead and put them together for Natiah Jones. She is an amazing photographer, and I wanted to get right into it to hear about how she got to where she is, and we'll talk a little bit about where she, where her projects are and where her focus is. So, Tia, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me.
You are welcome. It's a great to have you here. So why don't we jump right in? First and foremost, how do you describe yourself in terms of what is your focus on photography? Like what kind of photography, how do you describe yourself?
Um, I'm a photographer, mainly a portrait photographer, some lifestyle, some brandish work, but generally a portrait photographer.
Okay. So the first question I always ask everybody is, how'd you get here? How'd you get here? What has been your photography path? Where are you classically trained? Did you pick it up very, very early? Or did you come to it late in life? How'd you end up here?
Sure. That's such a loaded question, but I mean, so I'm originally from Washington, D.C., in Prince George's County, Maryland, right on that borderline. I grew up in both. So I grew up in a predominantly Black area. I think PG County was 96% Black when I was growing up.
Wow.
So
Okay.
yeah, and I spent 18 years there, and then I ended up going to St. John's. That's how I ended up in New York. I've been here for a little over 10 years now, and I studied sociology because I grew up poor, or lower class rather. And I just wanted to know why certain people who look a certain way and who believe in a certain thing and who come from a certain place end up the way that they end up. So I studied sociology at St. John's and English as my minor. In liberal arts, it really did. In liberal arts in New York, opened up a new world for me. It was like, I promise you, for the first 4 years that I came here during college, I was like living a movie. It was like I was inside of the movie, but actually living it too. And I remember during my freshman year, still being around predominantly Black people at this PWI. And I said, someone needs to be recording our experience here because I'm from DC, so I should have gone to Howard. I got accepted into Howard. My parents remind me anytime that they can that I should have gone to Howard. So
They're probably sticking it to you right now. It's like, see, you could have been Kamala's alumni.
absolutely, absolutely. So I wanted to document our authentic experience being like the still like hood, like it was hood, and we went to this PWI, this super rich school. Some people, myself personally, I don't know how I know how I got there. It's a huge loan that my mother took out, but
Right.
it was sort of surreal to go to these places like St. John's, like a PWI, and then still have to go back to the hood for Christmas and Thanksgiving and so and it involves a little bit of survivor's remorse as well. So I bought my first digital camera. It was a Canon, in my freshman year, and I just started taking pictures of all just the fun things that we were doing, and it sort of like morphed into different internships. I used to work for the Source magazine, and I worked for a magazine called The Wild Magazine, which is kind of like a hipster Vogue, based in Brooklyn. I don't even think it exists anymore. But it just photography and creativity and creative writing, specifically with that sociological aspect, it morphed into a career in marketing. So I'm a full-time marketer. I'm a senior marketing manager at a camera gear e-commerce company. So we sell and buy used camera gear. So that sort of morphed into photography, and my interest into why people end up the way that they end up has morphed into me studying those creative aspects based on audience and based on demographic in the marketing world, but also in the photography world. It has allowed me to sort of float in and out of street photography, a portrait photography, a brand photography, because I know so many different worlds. Like not too many people could say that they grew up during a crack epidemic, went to a
Right.
PWI in New York, ended up working corporate, and still are like a predominantly Black portrait photographer.
And now living through the other pandemic of
Absolutely.
COVID. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
And it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because your photography is very expressive. Like when you look at one of your pictures, you can tell that there's a story there, not just what the one that you're trying to tell, but also the one that your subject brings to the table. So it is definitely indicative of the fact that you studied how people come into a room, come into a space.
I mean, it's so interesting that you say that, because if I want to be known for anything in terms of photography, is helping people express the soul in their eyes, really, because we all have it there. I can look at someone personally, because I've been doing this work since this photo work, and sort of diving deep into Black life specifically and what that really means in authentic ways for about 10 years now. So I can look in someone's eyes and tell when they're troubled. And that's not
Yeah.
me being psychic or like clairvoyant or like me being judgmental. Like I can look in my eyes and I can see when I'm going through something. So it's allowed me to really be able to read people and read situations. Like, I've been during photo shoots where me and the subject have like just started bawling and crying. We didn't even know each other. It was because they had to release that energy. So
Yeah.
my goal with photography is just to release energy and to share it with the world. And hopefully we can really understand that like there's so many commonalities in just human beings in general.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you'd been, trying to document the Black experience for at least 10 years. And so that brings me to my second question. How has being a person of color uh, made your path through photography different than if you were a white photographer, whether it's access or whether what it is, what you focus on? How is it different being a Black photographer than a white photographer?
Sure. Well, internally, I will like I do like to point this out, that I do understand that there is a strength that lies within the way that I am able to communicate, but that's because I studied sociology. So, you have to learn the right words to say, the right things to call people. The what people identify as what is appropriate now was not appropriate 10 years ago, was not appropriate 20 years ago, was not appropriate decades ago when my grandparents were younger. So you really do have to understand. I have had to come to terms with a privilege that I've had
Hmm.
in studying sociology and leaving from where I'm originally from, to be able to have access to be able to express myself in really monumental ways, I think. In terms of being a Black photographer in comparison to being a white photographer, um, you really you're missing like the access, you're missing the money, but it's also that emotional component. You and I, we did a panel discussion earlier
Hmm.
this summer with three other Black women photographers, and to me, when it comes to comparing being a white photographer and a Black photographer, it's that emotion. Like,
Yeah.
no, they're not going through the same things that I'm going through. So even having to edit photos or to photograph protests or to photograph, like, not too many white women photographers have been in a situation where they've broken down and have cried with their subjects. Like, it's
Yeah.
heavy
Yeah.
emotion, it's heavy spirits that go on in the work that I do. So it's that emotion. And, we can talk about money and access and lack of resources in our community for literally decades, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So, and it again, as you're saying it, like all of the things that the trappings that go into society get, distilled down into your field as well. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. Well, listen, why don't we take a break right here, and we'll come right back, and we'll talk a little bit about what projects you have coming up.
Sweet.
Okay, and we are back. We're talking with Tia Jones, and this is In Focus. So here's where you get to boast about what you're doing. What projects are you working on? What's going on in your photography world right now?
Sure. So, in terms of personal projects, I really wanted to take a break from. Obviously, I'm always shooting because I love human connection, but to really take not really a break, but sort of a pivot and focus on my collective. It's called So's in Focus, and it's a visual artist collective made specifically for people of color, particularly for Black people. But we are like totally inclusive into for anyone who would like to join us, and we host monthly photo walks. Obviously, those were paused from, I think, March to July. But we're kicking those back off, and it's really to provide safe spaces and to host, like, different photo walks and different events and panel discussions and open-ended conversations on how to build community through photography and visual art. So I'm working on that, just strictly building community. If I learned anything in these past 10 years is that um, being a Black woman photographer doesn't mean anything if I can't see other Black women photographers. It doesn't mean anything if I
Yeah.
can't look at another person with the camera and we just give each other that look, like on the subway, like, respect. And to be able to harvest a platform and a space for people to come together. That's what I've been working on.
And so, if I am a Black photographer or a photographer of color, how do I find this group?
It's called Souls in Focus. You can find us on Instagram. We're in the midst of building out our website because we are actually about to launch membership where you can be a member of Souls in Focus. And there are going to be different perks like, exclusive invites to different dinners that we have these engaging conversations like this. Us holding down people during photo shoots. If you need a photo assistant, you'll pay a yearly or a monthly membership, and I'll come hold you down during a photo shoot. If you need behind the scenes work, if you need help getting a job or gigs, we're really trying to make this a really cohesive program for people to come and to feel welcome. Because, like we just discussed, access and money and resources are such a lack thereof in our community. So if I can go out of my way to ensure that we have that and that we have that community, that would be perfect.
Yeah, that's dope. I definitely support that. I'm looking forward to where that future goes.
Thank you.
So, here's the big old question. What advice would you give to your younger self? Let's say you ran into your 16-year-old self. What advice, knowing what you know now, would you give to your 16-year-old self?
Honestly, kindness. Like, if I've learned anything throughout my life, particularly these last few years, my grandparents raised me, and the older that you get, you start to cherish family more and cherish relationships with people like grandparents who are obviously temporary just because of age, right? And I've learned that my grandparents, they have such a innate and divine kindness about them, and that is what makes people want to believe in them. That's what makes people love them so hard and support them. And I've always, because they raised me, I've always have had that essence about myself, and my brother has it too, and my parents as well. However, in the past few years, it's just like, be a kind person and great things will happen. Because when you have something about your spirit that speaks to human connection and making a connection with our people and ensuring that every day that you wake up, that you do something good for our people, whether that's saying hi to an elderly woman on the street, whether that's going out and voting, or whether that is building a platform for people to learn from professionals like ourselves. You have to be kind and you have to do it from the heart.
Yeah, that's that's an amazing piece of advice, and I grew up with my grandmother as well, so I can attest to, just having that old soul and that sense of wisdom around you all the time, just grooms you in a different way. Yeah, so I can definitely attest to
And it
that.
really does. It speaks to photography too, because I
Yeah.
could go to someone on the street and just be kind, or like I said, like that look in your eyes where you can look at someone and understand the goodness in their heart, from the way that they present themselves. I have been presented with a lot of opportunities to not only photograph some amazing human beings, but also photograph amazing brands as well.
Yeah, and that I have a friend who's also ascribes to that exact same philosophy. It's like you, especially when it comes to street photography, if you are approaching it and approaching your subjects with kindness, you have so much more of an opportunity to get a beautiful image as opposed to somebody running away from you
Yeah, yeah,
or
exactly.
or or
Yeah.
sending out an aura in your picture that automatically tells you that I didn't want to be part of this project. So, yeah.
Yeah, you really never know who you're photographing. You never know who's watching you. You never know who's holding you down, who's saying, oh, Hayden, he's an amazing photographer. Maybe you should reach out to him, tell him that I sent you, stuff like that. Like, that goes a long way, but it all counts on you being a really good spirited human being.
Thank you. Well, I can attest from now right here that you are a good spirited human being, and I thank you for your good spirit and coming on the show. We really appreciate you, Tia, and we look forward to all big things coming from Souls in Focus and from everything else that you're working on. So thank you so much for being in focus.
Thank you.
All right, and we will catch up with you next time for our next photographer. Thank you so much. Have a good night.